Where are you watching from tonight? Somewhere quiet. Perhaps where the hum of the world has softened and stories from another time can still be heard. Tonight's tale takes us back to Detroit in the year 1921, a city roaring with machines, an ambition where one photograph captured something no one fully understood at the time. In the image, a man sits beside his family, his expression composed, almost proud. Yet behind his eyes, there lingers a tension, a secret burden. His name was James Caldwell, or at least that's the name history remembers. As Dr. Winters and Amelia uncover the truth behind that portrait, they find not just the story of one man, but of a nation struggling to define what it means to belong. Hidden letters, broken contracts, and quiet acts of courage reveal how ideals can clash with survival, and how a single moment, frozen in silver and light, can hold an entire country's unease. So settle in. Let's return to Detroit and the family who dared to be seen. On a rainy Tuesday morning in March 2025, Dr. Rachel Winters carefully sorted through a collection of photographs recently donated to the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. The collection, labeled the Caldwell Collection, contained over 300 family photographs spanning from 1890 to 1960, quietly chronicling the life of one family across decades of American history. Most of the images marked the familiar milestones: births, graduations, weddings, holiday gatherings. Yet among the ordinary, some held secrets that whispered from the past. As the curator of an upcoming exhibition on post-World War I American family life, Dr. Winters was particularly drawn to materials from the early 1920s. She murmured to herself, "This one might be promising," as she carefully lifted a well-preserved photograph from its protective sleeve. The portrait depicted the Caldwell family in 1921. Father James wore a dark suit, Mother Eleanor a fashionable dress with a string of pearls, and their 3 children were arranged by height in front of them. The composition was impeccable. The setting, a professional studio with a painted backdrop, perfectly appropriate for an upper-middle-class family of the era. Yet, as Dr. Winters examined James Caldwell under the archival light, something peculiar caught her eye. While the rest of the family displayed the composed, serious expressions typical of formal portraits, James's gaze seemed different. There was intensity there, a rigidity around his mouth, a tension in his posture that hinted at something more than the usual discomfort of sitting for a photograph. She reached for her magnifying glass. Under closer inspection, subtle micro-expressions emerged. Fear, perhaps even anger, carefully controlled yet unmistakably present beneath the surface of propriety. Amelia, Dr. Winters called softly to her research assistant. "I think we may have found something significant here." Amelia Chen, a doctoral candidate specializing in American visual culture, leaned closer to the photograph. "You're right," she whispered. "It's incongruous. The rest of the family appears prosperous content, but his face tells a different story." The date intrigued Dr. Winters, May 12th, 1921. Just weeks after the Emergency Quota Act was introduced in Congress, threatening to sharply restrict immigration. The Caldwells were a prominent business family in Detroit, but nothing in the donor materials explained their origins. Amelia studied the photograph again. His features suggest he may be of Eastern or Southern European descent. First generation, perhaps. Let's start with the basics Dr. Winters suggested. census records, naturalization documents, business registries. We need context before we can understand what this expression might mean. Their initial search revealed intriguing details. The 1920 census listed James Caldwell, 42, as the owner of Caldwell Manufacturing, producing automobile parts. His wife, Eleanor, 38, kept house. Their children, Robert, 14, Margaret, 11, Thomas, 7, were all attending school. The family lived in a prosperous Detroit neighborhood with 2 live-in domestic servants. More revealing was James Caldwell's naturalization record from 1905. His original name, Jacob Kalinsky, born in Warsaw, Poland in 1878. He had arrived at Ellis Island in 1896 and had become a naturalized citizen after the required waiting period. He had changed his name, not unusual for immigrants trying to assimilate, especially in business, Amelia noted. The timing is curious, Dr. Winters murmured. From Jakub Kolinsky to James Caldwell, from Poland to prosperity in Detroit. And now, this photograph taken just as anti-immigrant sentiment was reaching a peak. I wonder what he saw coming. Amelia's gaze lingered on the photograph, silent. The question seemed to hang in the quiet museum air, suspended like a shadow of a past, yet unresolved. The Detroit Historical Society preserved meticulous records of the city's industrial rise, particularly the explosion of automobile manufacturing that had transformed Detroit into the beating heart of modern industry. In the early months of their research, Dr. Winters arranged for special access to those archives, narrowing her focus to Caldwell Manufacturing and the man behind it. Caldwell started small, the archivist explained softly, sliding a set of incorporation documents and brittle business ledgers across the table. In 1908, just a small machine shop producing specialized tools. Then, as the automobile boom took hold, he shifted to manufacturing components. The records painted a clear picture. By 1915, Caldwell Manufacturing had secured contracts with several emerging automobile makers, including, most impressively, a partnership with Ford Motor Company. The ledgers showed steady growth, then a dramatic expansion in 1918 when the demand for wartime production surged. He was very innovative. Amelia noted quietly, her eyes scanning the patent filings under James Caldwell's name. 5 patents, all between 1910 and 1920. He wasn't just a businessman, he was an inventor. Dr. Winters unfolded a faded 1919 trade magazine. Inside was a photograph of James Caldwell standing proudly in front of his factory. His expression there was strikingly different from the tense, haunted gaze captured in the 1921 family portrait. Here he looked relaxed, confident, hopeful. Further investigation revealed that Caldwell employed a large immigrant workforce, especially from Eastern Europe. Payroll records from 1920 showed nearly 40% of his employees were first-generation Americans from Poland, Hungary, Italy, and Russia. "Look at this," Dr. Winters murmured, pointing to a bundle of correspondence between Caldwell and local politicians. He was actively speaking out against immigration restrictions as early as 1919. One letter dated February 1921, addressed to a Michigan congressman, was especially moving. In elegant cursive, James Caldwell had written, "As a naturalized citizen who has built an American business, employing hundreds of American workers, I implore you to consider the devastating impact these proposed quotas would have on our industrial capacity and on families seeking the same opportunity I was fortunate to find." The Emergency Quota Act was introduced just 2 months later in April 1921, barely weeks before the family photograph was taken. Amelia traced her finger along the date on the document, whispering he must have known what was coming. The act would change everything. Dr. Winters and Amelia expanded their research, piecing together the world that surrounded the Caldwell family in that uneasy spring. Under the new legislation, the annual number of immigrants from any country would be limited to 3% of the number of residents from that country living in the United States in 1910. As Amelia explained, that means immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe would plummet, while Western Europeans would still have relatively open access. In the newspaper archives of Detroit, the shift in public mood was unmistakable. The Detroit Free Press during those spring months ran editorials praising the quotas, warning of unassimilable foreigners and the need to protect American jobs and values. Letters to the editor revealed deep divisions. Industrial leaders largely opposed the restrictions, while many ordinary citizens welcomed them. The xenophobia was barely concealed, Dr. Winters whispered, scanning one yellowed article. And for someone like Caldwell, who had changed his name, who tried to bury his origins, that must have felt like the walls closing in. Then they found it a transcript of a speech James Caldwell had delivered to the Detroit Chamber of Commerce in March 1921, mere weeks before the law passed. The greatness of American industry, he had said, has always been fueled by the hunger and determination of those who chose to become Americans. To close our doors now is to betray our economic future and our national character. The words lingered long after Dr. Winters stopped reading. In the silence of the archive, both women felt it. The faint echo of a man who had built everything from nothing, and who must have sensed that soon even his name might not be enough to protect him. The speech, as Dr. Winters and Amelia soon discovered, had not gone unnoticed. It had caused a storm. Several members of the Chamber of Commerce had walked out in protest before Caldwell even finished speaking. In the days that followed, local newspapers carried heated editorials, some calling for boycotts of Caldwell manufacturing, spurred on by nationalist and nativist groups. He was putting himself at considerable risk, Amelia murmured. Her voice hushed against the faint hum of the archive room, both his business and his social standing. But the most revealing piece came from a private letter they uncovered in the Detroit Historical Society's collection, written by one businessman to another. Its tone was casual, but the words stung with quiet cruelty. Caldwell seems to have forgotten that he is now James, not Jacob. His outspoken opposition to the quotas has reminded everyone of his origins he had worked so hard to obscure. One wonders whether his wife's family, the Hancocks, appreciate having their name attached to such controversy. The pressure must have been immense, Dr. Winters whispered. And then he sat for that family portrait, trying to look composed, respectable, while everything around him was beginning to unravel. Eleanor Caldwell, née Hancock, had come from one of Detroit's established families, her lineage interwoven with the city's older, more traditional social circles. The marriage records showed she had wed James Caldwell in 1906, shortly after his naturalization. The Hancock family had deep Michigan roots stretching back to the 1850s, with Eleanor's father serving as a bank director and her uncle as a state legislator. The marriage must have been quite a step up for him, Dr. Winters observed, flipping through brittle newspaper clippings from the Detroit News Society pages. The Hancocks opened doors that would otherwise have remained closed to an immigrant entrepreneur. Photographs from charity balls and civic gatherings throughout the 1910s showed James and Eleanor Caldwell gradually being absorbed into Detroit's upper circles. James served on civic committees. Eleanor joined the Ladies' Auxiliary and became a patron of the arts. Together, they built the image of the perfect American family, the successful businessman Amelia mused, the well-connected wife, the well-educated children. That 1921 portrait, it's almost an advertisement for everything they'd worked to achieve. Even the Detroit Country Club membership records told a story. The Caldwells appeared on the roster in 1919, but with a note indicating that their application had first been deferred before later being accepted. Subtle proof that despite wealth and position, certain barriers lingered quietly in the background. Then something shifted. Early 1921, Dr. Winters said, scanning the society columns. They begin to appear less frequently at major events. No explanation. Just fading. One document, an invitation list for a prominent charity gala in April 1921, seemed to confirm it. The Caldwells' names had been crossed out, a faint notation beside them, reconsidered due to recent controversies. His advocacy was costing them socially, Amelia concluded. But there was one more discovery, a letter that struck both women silent. It was partially preserved, written by Eleanor's brother William Hancock Jr., dated late April 1921. Your husband's public positions have placed this family in an untenable situation. Father asks that James refrain from further statements that might embarrass the Hancock name. We have worked too long to build our place in this community to have it compromised by immigrant sentimentality. The family portrait, Dr. Winters whispered her eyes on the date. It was taken just 2 weeks after this letter. No wonder his expression carries such tension. To understand more, they turned to the 3 children in the photograph, Robert, Margaret, and Thomas. Records from Detroit Academy, where all 3 were enrolled, revealed a family striving for perfection. Each child was an excellent student. Robert, the eldest, excelled in mathematics and science. One teacher's recommendation for his college application described him as a credit to the American educational system and proof of the assimilation possible in just 1 generation. The phrasing is telling, Amelia noted softly. It implies that despite his father's origins, Robert had become acceptably American. But the most intimate insights came from Margaret Caldwell's diary, donated decades later to the Michigan Women's Historical Collection. The entries written in her delicate handwriting between January and June 1921 offered a child's unfiltered view of the family's unraveling world. One entry from February 1921 read, "Father argued with Uncle William again today. Mother cried afterward. Something about father speaking at a meeting. I don't understand why it upsets everyone so much." By April, Margaret's tone had changed. "Bobby came home with a bloody nose today. He wouldn't say what happened, but I heard him tell father some boys called us dirty packs and said we should go back where we came from." Father looked so angry and sad at the same time. He told Bobby we are Americans and to hold his head high. Then came an entry dated May 11th, 1921, the day before the family portrait. "Mother says we must all look our very best tomorrow for the photograph. She says it's important to show everyone that we are a proper family." Father has been very quiet. When I asked if he was excited, he just patted my head and said, Appearances matter more than we realize in America. The final entry from that spring was dated May 20th, 1921. Father's factory had its windows broken last night. Mother doesn't think I know, but I heard them talking. Someone painted "foreigners" out on the wall. Father says we must not show fear. I am trying to be brave like him. The words lingered in the silence of the archive. Dr. Winters sat back, her eyes distant. Appearances, she repeated quietly. Perhaps he wasn't just posing for a photograph. Maybe he was trying to hold together something already beginning to fracture. And for a long moment, neither of them spoke, only the sound of the rain tapping softly against the museum window, as if echoing the faint, forgotten sorrow of that May morning in 1921. The children Dr. Winters murmured were caught in the middle of it all. You could almost feel that in the photograph, the tension behind James Caldwell's carefully composed smile. He was a man trying to protect his family, even as the world he'd built began to tilt beneath him. Financial records from Caldwell Manufacturing revealed that spring 1921 had brought more than just social strain. Amelia traced her fingers across the fading ink of cancelled contracts. Small orders first, then larger ones, each cloaked in polite excuses. Reorganization, budget, revisions, market adjustments. Yet the timing told its own story. These cancellations aligned perfectly with James Caldwell's public defense of immigrant rights. It appears Dr. Winters said softly that his company was being quietly punished. Bank ledgers showed another blow: a major investor withdrawing support in late April, citing concerns about long-term stability. Behind that vague phrasing was something more personal, more political. Even Ford Motor Company, one of Caldwell's key clients, had begun to waver. A handwritten note from a purchasing manager read, "Caldwell's components remain superior, but his positions are becoming difficult. Harrison suggests we begin seeking alternate suppliers for the 22 model year." Everywhere he turned, the walls were closing in. Labor records revealed how deeply the pressure ran. Amid a growing wave of anti-immigrant hostility, James refused to dismiss his foreign-born workers. Men and women who had stood beside him since the factory's earliest days. All employees, he wrote to his foreman in May 1921, are to be judged solely by the quality of their work and their loyalty. Rumors of dismissals are false. We stand by our people. It was a noble stand, and a costly one. Insurance premiums on the factory rose by 40% after the vandalism in May. The word "foreigners" had been scrawled across the factory wall. Glass shattered. Fear lingered in the air like smoke. He was being squeezed from every side, Amelia whispered. Socially, financially, even physically. Still, James would not bend. A private letter to an old friend in Chicago, written just days after the family portrait, revealed the quiet heartbreak beneath his resolve. "I built this life by becoming what America asked of me, changing my name, my speech, burying my past. Yet even that seems not enough. They want me to close the door behind me, to deny others what I once sought. That I cannot do, even as I feel everything I've built beginning to crumble." 1 week later, on May 19th, 1921, the Emergency Quota Act became law. It was as though the photograph had captured the exact moment before the curtain fell. When Amelia and Dr. Winters studied immigration records from the months that followed, the effects were immediate and devastating. Ships that once carried hundreds from Eastern Europe now arrived half empty. Polish families in particular were turned away. their futures cut off mid-journey. At Caldwell Manufacturing, several workers had been saving to bring their relatives to Detroit, dreams now quietly extinguished by new quotas. James tried to help where he could. Letters showed that he hired an immigration lawyer to fight for stranded families and even created a small relief fund to support those who had lost everything. He was fighting a tide too vast to stop. The act was just the beginning, Amelia murmured. They were closing America's gates one law at a time. And somewhere in the stillness of that family portrait, with Eleanor's careful posture, the children's uneasy gazes, and James's shadowed eyes, you can almost see the weight of it all. A man trying to belong. A nation deciding who gets to. And perhaps as you look closer, you might wonder what price does one pay to be seen as truly American. The Detroit Free Press ran a political cartoon that summer, Uncle Sam stacking bricks labeled American values, building a wall to hold back a dark tide of weary foreign faces. The message was unmistakable. And for James Caldwell, it was deeply personal. In late May, he gathered his employees on the factory floor, the same men who had built his company from nothing. His voice, steady but heavy, carried through the workshop. Today feels like a defeat for the America I believe in. The America that welcomed me and gave me the chance to build this company with you. But I remain committed to proving, through our success and our character, that this nation is strengthened, not weakened by those who choose to become Americans. It was a quiet act of defiance. A few weeks later, in June 1921, the Polish-language newspaper Dziennik Polski published a front-page story about him, revealing for the first time in decades that James Caldwell had once been Jakub Kalinski, a son of Poland. The article praised his courage, calling him a man who has not forgotten his origins despite his success. For James, it must have been both validating and terrifying to see his true name in print again at a time when such honesty carried real danger. Business records from that summer showed that Caldwell Manufacturing somehow endured the storm. Major contracts held just barely. James continued speaking out, but more discreetly now in private meetings at small gatherings where conviction could still exist without headlines. By July, the family faced a crossroads. Amelia and Dr. Winters pieced together their decisions through surviving letters and records. One from Eleanor to her cousin in Boston offered a rare glimpse into their home life. James refuses to retreat from his principles, though it has cost us dearly. I once wished he would for the children's sake, but seeing their pride in his courage has changed me. They now understand that standing for one's beliefs is worth more than acceptance. That letter marked a turning point. In August 1921, property records showed the Caldwells sold their grand home in the Boston Edison district, trading it for a more modest house in another part of Detroit. They weren't retreating, they were recalibrating. James restructured his company that fall, focusing on specialized components that made Caldwell Manufacturing indispensable, despite the social backlash. And the children, Robert, Margaret, and Thomas, were enrolled not at the elite Detroit Academy, but at Elwood School, a progressive institution known for civic engagement and diversity. A letter from the headmaster read warmly, "We are honored to welcome students whose family demonstrates the principles of civic courage and international perspective that we hope to inspire in all our pupils. Even as the world turned colder, The Caldwells found new warmth in authenticity. That October, another quiet but profound act took place. James Caldwell formally joined the Detroit Polish Business Association under his birth name, Jakob Kolinski. For decades, he had buried that name. Now he claimed it again. They didn't retreat, Amelia reflected softly. They reaffirmed who they were, even when it cost them. By Christmas of 1921, a new family photograph was taken. In this one, 7 months after the tense portrait that began the investigation, James looks directly at the camera. The strain in his eyes has softened into calm. He is no longer a man divided, but one reconciled, at least for now. More than a century later, that portrait hung at the Smithsonian exhibition, Faces of America: Identity and Belonging in the Early 20th Century. Crowds gathered before it, drawn by something unspoken in his gaze. What makes this photograph so compelling, Dr. Winters explained at the opening, is that it captures a man and a nation at a crossroads. Success versus authenticity. Assimilation versus heritage. Security versus principle. The exhibit traced the family's journey beyond that year. Caldwell Manufacturing survived, adapted, and remained family-owned until 1956. Its name later synonymous with fair labor practices and quiet innovation. Each of the Caldwell children carried forward their father's legacy in their own way. Robert became an engineer patenting new manufacturing processes. Margaret became an immigration attorney, fighting for those her father once defended. Thomas, the youngest, served in World War II and later led the company through its most successful years. And James Jacob lived long enough to see the world change. At Robert's graduation in 1929, he spoke to a hall full of young Americans on the brink of a new decade. When I came to this country as Jakob Kolinski, I believed I had to become someone else to succeed. But America is not strengthened by our conformity. It is strengthened by our contributions. Courage, even when costly, is the legacy I hope to leave my children. A photograph from 1935 showed him standing at the opening of a community center for immigrant families, smiling beside his wife Eleanor, beneath a sign written in both English and Polish. The 1921 portrait, Amelia said during her final gallery talk, captures a man wrestling with who he must be to belong. But what makes this story remarkable is that the family didn't find peace by choosing one side over the other. They found it by weaving both heritage and hope into something new. The exhibition's final image was a candid snapshot. From 1941, James and Eleanor, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, laughter spilling across a sunlit yard. His smile, free, unguarded, utterly human, told the rest of the story. The immigrant who once hid his name had finally reclaimed it, and perhaps in doing so found what it truly meant to be American. Tell me, if you had to choose between belonging and being yourself, which would you keep?